Good morning, everyone. Good morning once again, Dr. Neeraj. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to be a part of this conference. And on the behalf of organizers and everyone, I welcome you all to the first day of the Diagnostic Week 2020. Our speaker for this session, as already told, is Dr. Jasmita, the extremely talented Dr. Jasmita Das, who is currently an assistant professor of hematology in AIMS. She completed her super specialization in hempath from the same place, and she has been very actively contributing to the field of hematology. She has various national and international publications, and today she would enlighten us about the significance of peripheral smear examination in hematological diseases. Over to you, Dr. Jasmita.
Thank you so much, Richa ma'am, for this kind introduction. And before I begin, I would like to thank Neeraj sir for this kind invitation to share the topic here today, that is the significance of peripheral evaluation in hematological diseases. So when we talk about peripheral smear evaluation for hematological diseases, I think it is virtually as important as examining a patient who comes to a physician's clinic. So when we look at a patient evaluation, technically, when a patient walks in, it's almost like a tripod. So the tripod consists of taking a thorough clinical history, then doing a clinical examination, a good thorough physical examination, followed by lab investigations to reach the diagnosis and hence manage the patient. So when we talk about utility of peripheral smear examination in hematology, there is no aspect of hematology which is untouched by the peripheral smear examination. So it is the diagnostic investigation for so many kinds of red cell disorders. It is used to type the anemia to identify if there is reticulocytosis or not. It gives clues to actual diagnosis, especially in the case of hemolytic anemias, and the parasites you always identify on the peripheral smear. For the WBC disorders, it is usually used to check the flag differentials with the modern cell counters, to identify blasts, left shift, abnormal lymphoid cells. To diagnose most of the WBC disorders, it's actually possible to do that using a peripheral smear examination and to look at the WBC inclusions. Now, be it toxic granulation or Dole bodies, or sometimes even bacteria inside or fungi inside the white blood cells. For the platelets, I think exclusion of pseudothrombocytopenia is the reason why we look at most smears in a regular clinical lab. In addition to that, a peripheral smear examination also helps us identify the platelet size as well as the granulation abnormalities. So this is what we've been all taught. So a peripheral smear consists of three components: the head, body, and the tail. Usually we use Romanowsky stains. Ideal stains would be May Grunwald Giemsa and Wright Giemsa because they give an optimal staining of the granularity and clear demarcation of the basophilia. So when you look at this smear on the left, now this is a smear made from an automated counter and an automated slide spreader, while this is the conventional manual smear that we are all used to. So peripheral smear is one of the basic investigations along with a complete blood count. However, it is mandatory in all settings. It yields a wealth of information if it is examined diligently. And with the advent of modern cell counters, only 10 to 20% smears need to be evaluated. However, if you miss a CBC and peripheral smear evaluation, it can lead to a complete miss of the clinical diagnosis. And today, this will not be a didactic talk. I'll essentially take you through 12 cases to illustrate the importance of peripheral smear in hematology. So as I said, so most peripheral smear evaluations are for checking low platelet count. So now this is a patient whose platelet count was reported as 30,000 by the cell counter, but when the smear was examined, there were these platelet clumps. So effectively, the patient's platelet count was normal and the cell counter had missed it. So this is what we refer to as pseudothrombocytopenia, and it occurs due to the presence of either platelet clumping or satellitism, as we are seeing here, or the presence of these large size platelets, which are almost as large as the size of RBC and are not counted as platelets. So this is one of the most frequent reasons why smears are examined in a clinical lab. However, the peripheral smear examination, as I said, is one of the most mandatory but yet simple investigations that a patient should undergo if they have walked into the clinic of any physician. So to illustrate this, the first case will be of a 21-year-old male who had symptomatic anemia since the last 2 years. Now there is a history of leg cramps, and also he reports few episodes of abdominal pain. So when the counter differential was looked at, the hemoglobin was 7.3, TLC was normal, platelets were low, and the MCV was high. So this is a no-brainer. It looks like a macrocytic anemia, right? And the RBC histogram also tells you that. So there is a population of these large macrocytes. Okay. Yeah. So the peripheral smear in this case revealed, when we looked at the size of the lymphocyte, nearly all the red cells were larger in size. You have these macrovalocytes, then you have the teardrop cells, basophilic stippling in the inset, and the classical hypersegmental neutrophil. The other fields in this case also showed megaloblastic nucleated red cells. So overall, this particular patient smear was screaming that the patient has megaloblastic anemia. However, the physician had already done a bone marrow by this time, and the bone marrow showed classical changes of megaloblastic anemia with the nucleocytoplasmic asynchrony and the giant myeloid forms as well. However, we need to remember that a bone marrow is nearly always avoidable in classical cases of megaloblastic anemia. So if you have the classical peripheral smear findings, it is always better to start the patient on a trial of B12 folic acid. And frankly, these are the marrows I do not want to see in my lab, because this is something which is an invasive investigation, and it is completely not required if you have the classical peripheral blood and the classical CBC and the peripheral smear findings. And this can easily be confirmed by either a vitamin B12 folate trial or by the levels at the time of diagnosis. However, in this case, it was not that simple, because the baseline reticulocyte count was 13.4%. Now that is very, very unusual in a case of megaloblastic anemia who's not receiving therapy. So looking at this reticulocytosis, a workup for hemolysis was initiated. However, there was no specific finding of any hemolytic anemia on the peripheral smear. LDH was quite high, G6PD was normal, DAT was negative, and an HbHpLC done earlier was also normal. So to identify the cause of hemolysis, we thought we may be dealing with paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. And when we performed the flow cytometry for PNH, it was actually positive with this huge population of CD157 and flare negative neutrophils and monocytes. So we need to remember that megaloblastic anemia may occur in cases of hemolytic anemias due to an increased requirement of folate, and it may mask the cause of hemolysis, and the patient will require workup after correction of megaloblastosis. So with that, that concludes the first case. So in the second case, we received a bone marrow from a 50-year-old female. Now she had complaints of mild hyperbilirubinemia off and on, and she had just a very, very small palpable spleen. So she was suspected to have an autoimmune disease or MDS because she had anemia, and her hemoglobin was 9, TLC was 8,500, and platelets were normal. So this was the smear finding. And I think the smear findings are diagnostic here. So because of the presence of these cells, which are called as the spherocytes. So these cells, they lack a central pallor and they're smaller in size than the corresponding red cells. So you have the spherocytes here, and in addition, you can identify a few polychromatophils in the field. So we went back to the patient and asked her about her older history. So she gave a history of weakness off and on after the birth of her second child. Incidentally, her son and daughter also had similar symptoms. So when you look at the family tree, now this is the patient, her daughter and her son reported similar symptoms of indirect hyperbilirubinemia and mild anemia. And together with the smear findings and this autosomal dominant history, it was clear that the patient is suffering from hereditary spherocytosis. So essentially, a peripheral smear examination which was missed, the diagnosis that was missed on the peripheral smear examination possibly elsewhere, led to an unnecessary bone marrow for this patient. So in HS, always remember that peripheral smear spherocytosis and a classical autosomal dominant history is usually sufficient to make the diagnosis. However, you can confirm it by doing the incubated fragility test, which is with the red line shows the patient's sample, and you can see that clearly the cells are more fragile than the normal cells, which are marked in blue. The control, that's marked in blue. You can confirm your diagnosis further by doing the eosin 5 maleimide dye binding test, and you can clearly see here that this is the control. The MFI is 5513, while the patient's MFI is reduced, and there is a fall in the fluorescence because of deficiency of the band 3 protein in the membrane. The OFT can also be replaced by a flow cytometric OFT in case you have the availability of a flow cytometer. So this is before spiking of distilled water, and this is after this red cell suspension was spiked by distilled water. And you can see that there are no residual red cells here. The percentage is less than 1%, and that also confirms the diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis. Now, spherocytes may also be seen in the subsequent case. Now, this is a subsequent situation. So this is a 50-year-old male who had jaundice since 1 week with increasing fatigue and mild splenomegaly. So when we look at the smear again, we can see the spherocytes, but this smear is interesting because it appears as if it only has spherocytes and it has polychromatophores. So this kind of a classical picture is usually seen with autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So in spherocytosis in HS, you have spherocytes, microspherocytes, NCNC cells, and a few polychromatophores, while in AIHA, you usually have generally either spherocytes or polychromatophores, at least in the acute phase of presentation. Now, case 3 was another interesting hemolysis, which was of a 56-year-old male presenting with anemia primarily in the winter months. And this was the peripheral smear. Now, this peripheral smear again screens as a diagnosis because you're seeing these red cell agglutinates. So now these red cell agglutinates clearly tell you that the patient is suffering from a cold type AIHA, but in a 56-year-old, we need to find the cause of the cold type AIHA. So for that, a bone marrow was done and the bone marrow exhibited an increase in the lymphoid cells, and the patient was confirmed to have Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia based on the serum protein electrophoresis and the flow cytometry, as well as by the MYD88 mutation. So this was a cold type AIHA secondary to Waldenstrom, but the peripheral smear is clearly diagnostic in this case with the presence of these red cell agglutinates. And this is how the counter findings look like in cases of cold type AIHA. So you have macrocytosis, but you have a disproportionately low RBC count when compared to the hemoglobin because red cells are passing through the point of interrogation in clumps. In addition to that, the MCH and MCHC appear to be extremely high. Now, this kind of MCH, MCHC is just not possible. So if your MCH and MCHC are beyond 35, 38, you should definitely warm the sample at 37 degrees Celsius and run it. And this is what you see. So at 4 degrees Celsius, you can see the agglutinates, while at 37, the same sample appears to be homogeneous. So you should rerun all these samples in case you have a disproportionately low RBC count and an extremely high MCH and MCHC. So as I said, cold type AIHA in children is usually secondary to infections and resolves on its own. However, in middle-aged and older adults, it is usually associated with chronic lymphoproliferative disorder, and it may be the first presenting sign of an underlying lymphoma, and it should trigger further investigations, including a bone marrow and flow cytometry, to exclude a clonal B cell population. So case 4 was another interesting case of a 32-year-old female. She was a person living with HIV/AIDS and was on heart. So she was referred to us for unexplained anemia and thrombocytopenia from Bihar. So here she underwent a routine CBC and peripheral smear. So now this peripheral smear confirmed the thrombocytopenia. It showed these hypersegmented neutrophils, possibly secondary to heart here, but you have these classical cells. So these classical cells are schistocytes. So she was having a microangiopathy here, which again is a diagnosis that should raise a critical alert. So these are the ICSH recommendations for identification of schistocytes. And essentially they say that you should give schistocytes as a percentage after counting at least 1,000 red blood cells. And usually schistocytes and NCNC cells or polychromatophores are the findings that you have on the smear. And you should always count all the cells that are either small crescents, helmets, keratocytes, microspherocytes also in the schistocyte count. Now, critical percentage here is above 1% for a diagnosis of microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. So in this case, the schistocyte index on the morphology was 8.2%. And I'm sure Handu sir will take you through the concept of fragmented red cells in his talk on the newer cell counters later in the session. So when we look at thrombotic microangiopathy or microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, these are the multiple causes that can cause this condition. So in our patient, it was actually HIV and she had HIV-associated TMA. Now, HIV-associated TMA carries a very poor prognosis for the patients of HIV who were diagnosed with thrombotic microangiopathy. And therefore, it is a diagnosis that you should not miss on the smear. And anytime that schistocytes are seen, it should raise a critical alert and the clinician needs to be informed. So there are other hemolytic anemias where a peripheral smear is virtually diagnostic. And in this case, it clearly shows these cells. These are blister cells and this is a bite cell. And this particular patient is a case of G6PD deficiency. Another interesting peripheral smear is when you see these elongated sickle-shaped cells. And in addition, you see certain boat-shaped cells, which are fat in the middle but are tapered off at the corners. And you have this red cell showing you a clear Howell-Jolly body. So this is a patient of sickle cell anemia and sickle crisis, and this Howell-Jolly body indicates reduced splenic function or autosplenectomy that these patients frequently have. So now I've shown you 4 cases where it was primarily the red cell disorders. We'll move on to the WBC disorders now. So this was the counter report from a 60-year-old male with massive splenomegaly. So when you look at this particular report, the hemoglobin appears to be normal. The platelets are just marginally low, and lo and behold, on the peripheral smear, they were normal. The TLC was 8,400, and the only abnormal finding here is the presence of monocytosis, apparent monocytosis, which is 3,440. So you are able to see this green cluster here, which represents the monocytes. Now, in this case, this flag of monocytosis was there, blast abnormal lymphos was there, so the smear was reviewed. So this is one of the examples where you would do a smear review just to check the flagged parameters. So this monocytosis triggered the peripheral smear evaluation. And this was the smear review. So when you look at this particular smear review, you see 2 neutrophils and you see these 5 lymphoid cells. So there are no monocytes as such in this field. So so the smear was examined further, and this was the morphology of these cells. So all these cells, they exhibit projections, and they have these oblong, almost reniform sort of nuclei, which are seen in this one, and the others exhibited oval nuclei. So the diagnosis here, the peripheral smear was diagnostic, and this is the classical appearance of hairy cell leukemia. Of course, you will not just give out a diagnosis of hairy cell leukemia on the peripheral smear, but you would confirm it. So again, another view showing you these projections and the classical nuclear morphology of hairy cell leukemia. So this was TRAP, which was done, and TRAP was strongly positive in the hairy cells. That is again another supportive investigation, but the final confirmation came by the peripheral blood immunophenotyping. So on the CD19 positive cell gating, the cells were bright positive for 20, and in addition exhibited CD103 and 123 positivity, and were positive for 25, CD25 and 11C as well. So this confirms the diagnosis of hairy cell leukemia. So interestingly, let's see why they enter the monocytic region. So CD123, 103 was backgated. So this particular population of cells was backgated because these are the hairy cells. And these hairy cells, they go and sit nicely in the, nicely occupying the monocytic region. So they start from the lymphoid region, but they reach up to the monocytic region. And this is what was being reflected in the cell counter differential as well, where monocytosis was identified by the counter, which turned out to be all hairy cells on the peripheral smear evaluation. So this case illustrates that any flag differential should be checked, and you may have surprises even though you may have conventional flags and the cell counter may tell you that it has been able to identify the populations. So now case 6 was another interesting patient who was referred to us. So she was a 54-year-old female who was admitted with swine flu. She had bilateral pneumonia, and this was the CBC finding. So her hemoglobin, she had anemia, her hemoglobin was 7.1, and the platelet counts were just marginally low at 1 lakh. TLC was essentially normal. So this particular patient smear, we expected to see just some reactive lymphoid cells and, maybe have an anemia of inflammation, normocytic, normochromic, or maybe a few macrocytes at the maximum. But we were surprised when the smear was evaluated, because here you have these rouleau formation in the red cells, which tell you that the patient may have some amount of hypergammaglobulinemia, and you have these particular cells. So these 3 cells are cells that have eccentric nuclei, and they have quite a basophilic amount of cytoplasm and resemble plasma cells. So the other fields were also examined, and the other fields again revealed an increase in the plasma cells that were present on the peripheral smear in this patient. So we suspected that the patient has a plasma cell leukemia, and she underwent, so plasma cell leukemia is diagnosed when you have clonal plasma cells, which are either more than 20% of the total leukocyte differential, or the absolute count is more than 2000. And because circulating plasma cells are a very poor prognostic sign in myeloma, so therefore the cutoff for plasma cell leukemia is being proposed to be lowered down to 500 now. So this patient underwent myeloma panel on the peripheral blood. So the plasma cells were gated on CD38, and on the CD45, they were essentially all 45 negative. 56 was positive, and 19 was heterogeneous in this case. And these particular plasma cells were clonal for lambda. So the diagnosis of plasma cell leukemia was confirmed on flow cytometry, but the peripheral smear evaluation directly told you that the patient may be suffering from a plasma cell leukemia. So this particular case again illustrates the fact how important the peripheral smear examination is. Even though the TLC appears to be normal in this case, the smear was diagnostic and it revealed the presence of plasma cell leukemia in a patient who was otherwise not really suspected to have a plasma cell dyscrasia. So now another common situation in the lab where peripheral smears give very important clues and guide the further investigations and investigations in a patient are case 7A and 7B. So this was a 56-year-old lady who had symptomatic anemia. There was particularly no cause for the anemia and the nutritional deficiencies were ruled out, and she progressively developed thrombocytopenia. Lowest platelet count was 50,000, but she had no manifestations of bleeding. Her TLC was normal, so this patient underwent a peripheral smear examination. The peripheral smear examination showed the red cells to be just normocytic to macrocytic, but you had left shift and nucleated red cells in the peripheral smear as well. So now when you see these nucleated red cells and left shift, this classical appearance is generally called as a leukoerythroblastic blood picture. So here, the red cells, there is no prominent poikilocytosis in the red cells. It's an isocytosis, but not poikilocytosis. So for leukoerythroblastic blood picture, you have these multiple causes that can be there, of which myelophysis, myeloproliferative neoplasm, they are the ones which are frequent, in addition to acute hemolysis or severe trauma, in which case you may have a reactionary leukoerythroblastic blood picture. Again, marrow infiltration or granulomatous inflammation of the marrow can also result in this picture. So the bone marrow in this case revealed these cluster of metastatic cells, and she was diagnosed as a breast carcinoma just based on an initial evaluation of a leukoerythroblastic blood picture, the bone marrow metastasis, and then the breast primary was found. Case 7B, in contrast, was of a 60-year-old female, anemia requiring transfusion. So now this also is a leukoerythroblastic blood picture, or sorry, this picture also shows a left shift, but you have basophils, you have the left shift, and in addition, you have poikilocytosis. So in this poikilocytosis, you have these numerous teardrop cells that you see in the peripheral smear. Other fields also exhibit the nucleated red cells. So this particular leukoerythroblastosis with basophilia again triggers a bone marrow examination, this time suspecting a myeloproliferative neoplasm, particularly primary myelofibrosis. So the bone marrow biopsy will confirm your findings of primary myelofibrosis. However, the clues that the peripheral smear gives is the presence of basophilia, again leukoerythroblastosis, and prominent teardropping. So whenever you have leukoerythroblastic blood picture on the peripheral smear, investigations are guided by the presence of additional clues, as well as the very fact that there is leukoerythroblastosis would require further evaluation. Now, I don't have to tell you the diagnosis for this case. So on the cell counter itself, many of you would have already gone, oh, we are looking at a chronic myeloid leukemia. So this is a 45-year-old male with abdominal pain and splenomegaly, and you have this classical hyperleukocytosis with left shift and basophilia on this smear. So this is what you confirm on the peripheral smear examination, and the peripheral smear shows you all the immature myeloid precursors. In addition to that, you can identify nice basophils here, and the diagnosis is of a chronic myeloid leukemia in chronic phase. Now, this is a diagnosis that you can easily establish on the peripheral smear. A bone marrow is done not for the establishment of diagnosis, but just to confirm or check the percentage of blasts, as well as send the sample for cytogenetics and the assessment of baseline marrow fibrosis. Now, case 9 is a case which should never be missed on a peripheral smear. Now, this is a 30-year-old female who had bleeding per vaginum. She had pancytopenia, so all the counts, the TLC was low, hemoglobin was low, and the platelets were also low. And she appears to have, again, monocytosis. But the smear reveals these classical bilobed cells. Now, these bilobed cells, some of them have got this dusky cytoplasm with this high granularity. And if you carefully identify, carefully screen the peripheral smear, you will be able to identify this cell, which is also called as the Faggot cell. And this confirms your diagnosis as a hypogranular acute promyelocytic leukemia. Hypogranular, why? Because most of the other cells are actually hypogranular, even though you've been able to find a Faggot. So suspicion of APML on peripheral smear, if you have even an iota of suspicion, you should raise a critical alert. That is because therapy is to be instituted with ATRA with or without ATO. And you don't have to wait for a PML RARA for confirmation and a bone marrow for confirmation, because this therapy can be started without causing the patient any harm and would greatly benefit the patient because would prevent coagulopathy and a sudden bleed that the patient otherwise may develop. Now, case 10 is another interesting situation where you have an old male who has anemia which is not really responding to therapy. And when you look at all these findings on the peripheral smear, you clearly know that you're dealing with almost a donut kind of a hypogranular neutrophil. Then you again have hypogranular neutrophils here. You have whole body-like inclusions, hypogranularity, pseudopellular anomaly, and this sort of a segmentation is clearly abnormal for a neutrophil. So all these images, they tell you that you are dealing with a diagnosis of myelodysplastic syndrome most likely. And this is dysglandopoiesis that you're easily able to identify in the peripheral smear. So when we look at the features of dysplasia that are there, dysmyelopoiesis, you can identify the features highlighted in white all on the peripheral smear examination, be it the pseudopellular anomaly, hyposegmented neutrophils, hypogranularity, or even the presence of OR rod or pseudo Shediac-Higashi granules. All of these are clearly identifiable on the peripheral smears. Peripheral smear gives an important clue if MDS is one of the considerations. Now, case 11 was another gratifying case that we saw. So this was an 85-year-old retired doctor. He was the father of a radiologist who had shoulder joint pains for which he had received steroid therapy. Now, CBC at that time had shown leukocytosis and monocytosis, which sort of persisted 3 months down the line. And he also developed anemia and intermittent fever. So this was the cell counter report. TLC was 26,510. It was elevated, and there was monocytosis as well as neutrophilic leukocytosis. So when a smear was evaluated, you could see all the monocytes clearly. So there was neutrophilic leukocytosis plus monocytosis. Platelet count appears to be normal. So you have these monocytes here that are present. In addition to that, however, the smear also gave additional clues. So all these neutrophils that are there are dysplastic. Some of them are hypersegmented. All of them nearly are hypogranular. And in addition, you had an occasional blast. You have an occasional blast on the peripheral smear. And this patient with persistent monocytosis having the neutrophilic dysplasia doesn't have a reactive monocytosis, doesn't have a reactive neutrophilic leukocytosis. He actually has chronic myelomonocytic leukemia. Of course, you would do a bone marrow here for confirmation for doing the blast counts, but the peripheral smear is able to distinguish reactive monocytosis from the monocytosis of chronic myelomonocytic leukemia. Now, case 12 is courtesy Dr. Sunita Sharma. This was a 7-year-old female who presented with high-grade fever with chills and cough for 5 days. There was no hepatosplenomegaly. She had bicytopenia. The chest X-ray showed a lower lobe consolidation in the right lung. And there was a history of 4 similar episodes in the last 2 years. Now, that's quite unusual, and it screams that the patient might have a primary immunodeficiency disorder. A bone marrow had been reported as HLH elsewhere, and this was the peripheral smear. So these particular granules here, the thick granules in the neutrophils, in the lymphocytes, clearly tell you that the diagnosis is Shediac-Higashi syndrome. So now this is a diagnosis which you can easily make or suspect on the peripheral smear examination if you see these thick granules. So with these 12 cases, I think I've been able to show you how important the peripheral smear evaluation is in the diagnosis of hematological diseases. So it is a basic yet indispensable investigation. It is as important to a hematopathologist as a careful physical examination to a physician or salt to a chef. Diligent peripheral smear examination can reveal the diagnosis in many hematological diseases, as well as guide further workup and avoid unnecessary invasive investigations in patients who report to physicians. And it's important to raise critical alerts. We need to remember that we may do a very good job of examining a peripheral smear, but we have to talk to the clinicians. We have to tell them in case we're suspecting blasts, if we're suspecting a myelodysplastic leukemia, or if we've seen blasts or schistocytes and falciparum. And these are just few examples of the critical alerts that the peripheral smear brings up. And these are the guests that you can find on the peripheral smear. So to your left is Candida. This was a case of perforation peritonitis who had invasive fungal infection. This is the falciparum gametocyte. These are microfilaria, and this is trypanosoma. So you can find all these guests in the peripheral smear if you're doing a careful evaluation. And with this, I would like to thank you for a patient hearing. Thank you so much.